Doing a video just showing how to change the belts on this lawnboy. It's a four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, whatever you want to call it. It's got front and rear belts, and how to change the belts because they're worn out. It's a nasty job. I don't think they could have designed it any worse. And I'm a mechanic for a living. I see a lot of stupid stuff. But what you have to remove is this cover. Goes over the front end, along with the blade and the cover over the belt on the inside. I used a C-clamp to the edge and a hammer and a wrench to get that blade off because it's tight. Because you're going to need to pull that assembly down like that in order to drop the rear axle out of this. In order to get the guard, let me show you here what I mean on the front. As you can see here, there's a guard that goes over the pulley to keep the belt in it, and it's held on with Robertson square screws, square head drive, which if he had been smarter, that's what the whole world would use instead of lousy Phillips that's cam out. But Robertson had been burned before, and when he was approached by Henry Ford to have his Robertson screws put on all of Henry Ford's vehicles, he was afraid to sign a contract with Ford, and so the world got stuck with the horrible Phillips design instead. But that's what you need to get that off. Then you got to drop the rear axle out of it to get the same guard off the rear one and do that belt. Just to show you how much fun these things are to do a belt change. So once you get the guard free, you can unhook this spring, because the belt of course goes through the middle of it. And then you can reach underneath, get it off the axle shaft, or just undo it that way and feed your new one in, put that back together, but not before you do the rear one. So the front belt is the longer one of the two. They're not the same length, just to make things more fun. This is the part number that came attached to it. I don't know if that's correct or not. This, I believe, is what I actually ended up searching for. I was able to get them both off of Amazon, but not with the overnight shipping. But 21032021. And as I said, that's the front belt. So now we'll go to the rear. So for the rear drive unit, you have to unbolt there's 4 bolts here, two on each end, that they secure these loops that the axle is attached with. And even once you get those free, you'll find that the height adjustment arm will be locked into the mower, and you're going to have to pop that free. Same is true on the front when you're getting the cover off. But once you get that, the axle drops right out if you've disconnected all the rest of this garbage. And because the way the belts are stacked, you got to do the rear one, then do the front one, because the rear one goes over as far as in height. The rear one is down here and the front one's up here. Kind of a different ratio from the look of it, but it works. So that's how to get it free. And then once again, Robertson screws, change the belt, and then you got to reassemble it all. And the first thing I didn't show, but in order to get enough slack to disconnect the spring on the tension assembly that actually engages and disengages the belts by rocking the axle assembly transmission, so it doesn't slip on the belt anymore. I just popped that lever, and the easy thing to do is this end here that doesn't have all the bends and whatever. Just pull up and flex the handle, and it'll pop right out of the arm. And that'll give you all the slack that you need in these cables to be able to work everything loose. The rear belt, that's the actual dimensions. It's a 3/8 32. I believe that's 32 inch. This is one part number I was able to find it under, but it is the same length as the old one, so it will work. So I've got the new belt installed, the guard back on. Need to make sure that this arm right here is extended forward on the assembly, just like that. You could install that guard backwards, And if you do, you'll have problems because this arm is where your spring, which puts your tension on, is attached to. Just make sure you have it set up like that, then reinstall it. Just in case it wasn't clear before, this is the brackets that actually attach the rear axle to the frame, and push that in home and put the screws in, and that's how that assembles in the mower. Just make sure you've got your belt fed through the correct way to be able to put that back together. Put the axle bolts in now. Before you put the blade holder assembly with the two pulleys back on the drive shaft, just note that there's a slot in the shaft, and there is, if you can see it down inside of there, a little keyway that has to line up with that slot. Not only that, but there's this washer that has to go on top of the shaft down inside of there. So it's got a flat spot on one side. I'm not really sure why. I'm guessing that's something to maybe think to help to make it easier to align, but that gets basically dropped down in there. And then you just want to make sure, oh, that's why, to actually help you get it in and out. And just make sure that it is flat down on the bottom like that, and line up your keyway with the slot in the shaft. And before you put it down over the shaft, make sure you start both, or at least the rear belt. The front belt doesn't matter, but you have to start the rear belt in this groove that's at the bottom, closer to the blade, before you slide it down over the shaft, or it's going to give you no end of trouble trying to get it back together. And you can actually look through the hole and see that washer is lined up. Especially if you use a flashlight, you will be able to see that it is lined up with the bolt hole in the shaft, and it's flush the way it needs to be. So now with your rear belt on the pulley correctly and your front belt positioned below it, you can put the blade back on because it's not going to get in the way after this, and continue on with putting the front belt on the transmission, which come around here, and you can see there's our front transmission, and you just simply need to flex it back enough to put the belt over it. So now our front belt is in place, and once again we'll have to install this guard with the Robertson screws, and there's an additional spring that goes from here to that bolt to help pull the this front axle assembly back, so there's no tension on the belt when it's not engaged. So I'll show you that next. So I've got the guard screwed back in place, got the belt under it correctly on the pulley, got that spring hooked on the way it needs to be, and the last part is just simply hook that spring into that loop right there. This is what keeps the belt slack until you pull the handle and engage everything and put tension on the belt, which gives it friction on the pulley. So now here's your front cover assembly. It snaps back in place, and you do need to put this back on because that's how your height adjustment, that's what it latches into to lock it in place, and that's held with 5 screws or bolts, whatever you want to call them, under here. You can see one is there, one is up there, one here in the middle, and then the same thing, there's one in there and one in there. So the last thing you got to put on is your 2 guards to cover your belts. And the way to tell the hardware apart is the ones for the belts have this step under the shoulder of the bolt, and the ones for the front end are threaded full length up to the shoulder. Your rear guard has to go on first, under here, like that. The one thing to remember is it has that one little teeny tiny bolt on top that goes through the forward hole right there. The aft hole is for that locator pin in the top of it. And then you get your two shouldered bolts down there and down there. Your front belt guard can be a little bit of a hassle, only because these two bolts are actually screwing into plastic threads underneath that cover for the belt, and this end needs to go around the outside of the belt, because it is actually a belt guard to make sure the belt stays, for the front belt stays in the pulley. And then once you've got that all lined up, you can screw it home. And the last thing is the handle. Of course, don't forget to reconnect the spring on the rear axle, or you'll only have front wheel drive and not all wheel drive. So with everything else assembled, last part, to reestablish tension the way it needs to be. You can see right here, I had the assembly of the handle loose. I just popped it back in that hole. And then here on this side, I just pull in, and it's back in place. And now our drive lever is in place and ready to go. This one was never touched for the handle or the engine brake and shut off. And this wonderful machine is all back together.